Look at the modern world closely enough, and you'll find Mongolia everywhere. The borders of the Middle East, the rise of Russia, the Silk Road, even the age of exploration, all connect back to nomads from the frozen grasslands of Central Asia. Today, Mongolia has just 3 million people, but its ancestors built the largest empire in human history under Genghis Khan, conquering a quarter of Earth's land before collapsing in less than 200 years. This is the story of how a remote land on the steppe changed human history forever. The harsh origins of the Mongols. What kind of people could survive in one of the harshest environments on Earth? Mongolia was a land of extremes, winters freezing at -40 degrees, summers burning at +40, with endless grasslands offering little shelter or water. Yet humans lived here for over 50,000 years. Over time, the people of the steppe mastered the horse, turning this brutal landscape into a highway for trade, migration, and war. By 1000 BC, powerful nomadic cultures dominated Central Asia. The Xiongnu became such a threat that China began building the early defences that later evolved into the Great Wall of China. Across the centuries, steppe empires rose and collapsed, but none could unite the fractured tribes permanently. By the 12th century, the Mongols and their rivals were trapped in endless warfare. Then a young boy named Genghis Khan watched his father die, and the history of the world changed. Quick question. Did you know the Great Wall of China was built specifically because of Mongolian steppe warriors? Yes or no in the comments right now. I'll personally pin the most interesting response I get. The rise of Genghis Khan, around 1162 AD. A boy named Genghis Khan was born on the Mongolian steppe under the name Temüjin. His early life looked nothing like the beginning of an empire. When he was 9, his father was poisoned by rival Tatars, and his own clan abandoned the family to die. His mother Holan raised her children alone in brutal conditions, surviving on roots, berries, and whatever they could hunt across the frozen grasslands. As a teenager, Temüjin was captured by enemies and forced into slavery under a heavy wooden collar called a kang. He escaped, was recaptured, and escaped again. Those years hardened him. He learned that survival on the steppe depended on loyalty, alliances, and strength. Over the next 2 decades, he united the fractured Mongol tribes through warfare, strategy, and ruthless revenge against enemies like the Tatars and Merkits. In 1206, at a great assembly known as the Kurultai, he was declared Genghis Khan, universal ruler. He reorganized the tribes into a disciplined, merit-based army, creating the most powerful military force the world had ever seen. Why could no army stop the Mongols? What followed over the next 60 years is almost impossible to comprehend in scale. The Mongol army moved with a speed no medieval force could match. Every soldier was a horseman. Every horseman could cover 100 kilometers in a single day. They carried everything they needed on horseback. No supply lines, no slow baggage trains, no logistical vulnerability. And before every campaign, Mongol spies had already mapped the roads, identified the weak points, and seeded fear with stories of what happened to cities that resisted. Cities that surrendered immediately were spared and often absorbed into the Mongol system. Cities that resisted were made into examples so brutal that the next city would hear about it and surrender without a fight. The Jin dynasty northern China fell after years of grinding warfare. The Khwarezmian Empire of Central Asia, which had made the fatal mistake of massacring Mongol trade ambassadors, was obliterated so completely that cities like Samarkand and Merv, which had been among the largest in the world, were reduced to rubble. Baghdad fell in 1258 to Genghis Khan's grandson Hulagu. The city that had been the intellectual capital of the Islamic world for 500 years was sacked. The Great Library, containing possibly the largest collection of human knowledge in existence, had its books thrown into the Tigris River. Eyewitnesses wrote that the water ran black with ink for days. The Mongols swept into Russia, Poland, and Hungary. They defeated every European army sent against them. They were within striking distance of Western Europe when they suddenly stopped, pulled back by the death of the Great Khan and the need to elect a successor. Western Europe was saved not by its knights or its walls, but by Mongolian succession politics. At its peak, the Mongol Empire controlled 24 million square kilometers, the largest contiguous land empire in all of human history. It would never be surpassed. The Mongols built history's greatest empire through pure destruction, but what they created inside that empire is the part that changed the entire trajectory of the modern world, and almost nobody talks about it. The golden age of the Mongol Empire. After the conquest came something no one expected from history's most feared warriors: peace. The Pax Mongolica, Mongol peace, lasted roughly from 1250 to 1350. For the first and only time in history, a single authority controlled the entire Silk Road from China to Eastern Europe. Trade that had previously been fragmented, dangerous and slow became fast, safe, and enormously profitable. The Mongols built the Yam, a relay system of stations across the entire empire, spaced a day's ride apart, stocked with fresh horses, food and shelter. It was the world's first international postal and communications network. A message from China could reach Persia in weeks. Chinese innovations, gunpowder, printing, the compass, paper money, travelled west for the first time. Islamic mathematics, medicine and astronomy travelled east. The cross-pollination of ideas across the entire Eurasian continent during this period was unprecedented. A Venetian merchant named Marco Polo travelled to the court of Kublai Khan in China in the 1270s. The book he wrote upon returning described cities larger than anything in Europe, wealth beyond imagination, and technologies the West had never dreamed of. Columbus was searching for a sea route to the same China Marco Polo had described. The entire age of exploration, Vasco da Gama, Magellan, Columbus, was Europe's attempt to reach the world the Mongols had revealed. And Genghis Khan had declared complete religious freedom across his empire from the very beginning. Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Taoists, shamanists, all were free to practice without persecution. In an era when Europe was burning heretics and launching crusades, the world's largest empire had religious tolerance as a founding principle. But the same network that carried silken ideas also carried something no one intended. The Mongols accidentally delivered something along their trade routes that killed more people than their entire military conquest. And the world it left behind was so different that historians call it the beginning of the modern era. The dark legacy of the Mongol Empire didn't just conquer cities, it reshaped the course of human history. As Mongol armies expanded across Asia and Europe, they reopened trade routes that connected the known world through the Silk Road. But along those same routes travelled something far deadlier: the plague. In 1346, during the siege of Kaffa, Mongol forces reportedly launched plague-infected bodies over the city walls, one of history's earliest examples of biological warfare. Merchant ships fleeing the city carried the disease into Europe. Within years, the Black Death killed tens of millions, collapsing economies, weakening feudalism, and helping trigger the social changes that led to the Renaissance. Meanwhile, after the death of Genghis Khan in 1227, the empire fractured into rival khanates stretching from China to Russia. Some, like the Yuan dynasty and the Golden Horde, shaped entire civilizations before eventually collapsing themselves. In less than 200 years, the Mongols built the largest empire in history and watched it disappear back into the steppe. Mongolia after world conquest today. Mongolia is a democracy of 3 million people. Its capital, Ulaanbaatar, is a rapidly developing city of skyscrapers and Soviet-era apartment blocks. Roughly half the population still practices some form of traditional nomadic herding. The jur, the circular felt tent, is still home to millions of Mongolians, some in the countryside, some in settlements on the outskirts of the capital. Genghis Khan's face is on the currency. His statue dominates the central square of Ulaanbaatar. The airport is named after him. He is not a source of shame for Mongolians, he is the central figure of national identity. A man who took a fragmented collection of starving tribes and briefly made them masters of the world. Mongolia sits between Russia and China, two giants whose own histories were shaped profoundly by Mongol conquest. It navigates that impossible geography with a foreign policy it calls the third neighbour strategy, cultivating relationships with the US, Europe and Japan as counterweights to its two enormous borders. The steppe is still there, the horses are still there, the winters are still brutal, and the descendants of the people who once ruled the world are still riding across that landscape under the biggest sky you have ever seen. The legacy of Genghis Khan, a boy abandoned on the frozen steppe with nothing. No army, no kingdom, no future anyone believed in, betrayed, enslaved, and left to die more than once. That boy became Genghis Khan. In less than a lifetime, he united tribes that had warred for centuries and built the largest contiguous empire in human history. The Mongols connected east and west through trade, reshaped borders across Asia and Europe, and changed the direction of global history forever. Their conquests helped spread the Black Death, weakened feudal Europe, and indirectly opened the path toward the Renaissance in the modern world. The rise of Russia, the trade routes between China and Europe, the balance of power across the Middle East. All of it carries the fingerprints of the Mongols. One life on the steppe changed the planet. If this documentary changed how you see Mongolia and the Mongols, subscribe. Next, the rise and fall of the Ottoman Empire.